people join in. They're late, and as you now know, this will be recorded. There are a couple of announcements. So one quick announcement: at the state level on December 5th at 6:30, there's a webinar by author Ben Sheehan, who wrote a book called OMG WTF Does the Constitution Actually Say? So here, I don't know if you can see this, but anyway, here's the book, and I put a link to that webinar on the website because he's going to talk about democracy. He's going to talk about kind of bust some myths, and I think that's kind of going to be one not to miss. And if you miss it, it'll be recorded and put on the Utah website. And I believe that Linda's going to give us another announcement. Yes? But you have to unmute, Linda. You need to, you have to unmute. There you go.
Okay. So I don't mess this up. I have a cheat sheet. We are having our winter social, League of Women Voters Winter Social, and it's going to be on December 6th, and it will be from 6 to 8 p.m. in the evening. It will be in the Holiday City Hall, and it's a potluck. So if you feel like eating, you're going to have to bring something to contribute. And you need to bring utensils. Oh, no, you don't. You need to bring your own plate and your potluck item and a donation, which is either a check or packaged food for the Utah Food Bank. December 6th. Okay.
So next week, 5th the social, 6th the webinar.
And yeah, and everybody sign up that's going, because the person on the decorations committee needs to know how many tables I need to decorate. So
there you go. So be a good doobie and RSVP.
Yeah. Fill us in.
Spread the word. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. All right. So we are just a few minutes, like 5 minutes after the hour. We're saving the last 10. And just if you didn't hear it, I'm Jill's voice today. Because she has laryngitis, and we're going to try and keep her on the road to recovery. The last 10 minutes, Chris is going to give us an update on viruses and vaccines, as well as any climate issues, as he usually does so well. But that gives us the rest of the time for Hannah Fries to take us through today's program. Hannah is an environmental scientist, and she's the manager of the Optimization Project. So she's here today to talk about that project titled the Utah Agriculture Optimization Project, Reducing Water Usage to Preserve the Great Salt Lake. And again, I'm going to put a link to the water study that the League of Women Voters of Utah did this past year in the chat, as well as a link to the webinar that was on Great Salt Lake. But I'm sure that we're going to get some additional interesting information from Hannah's study, and I'm just going to turn it over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a little presentation to share with you all today. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. When I got to give a presentation during the Colorado River meeting with the other group of women voters, that was fun for me as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. Let me back my slides up. So I just want to give a brief overview of the program, the Water Optimization Program, and the work that we're doing, and kind of highlight some of those things, and then give a few criteria update as we roll the program forward. As many of you are, I'm sure, very aware, Senate Bill 277 was passed in the last legislative session that directly affected the Ag Water Optimization Program, and with it brought some changes that we're in the process of implementing now as we move the program forward. So you can just see here, this purpose statement was taken right out of the policy that we passed with the Water Optimization Committee to maintain viable agriculture and reduce water depletion to enhance water availability and minimize impacts on the water supply, water quality, and the environment. So that's really kind of the mission statement that we're driven with, and the vision that we have for the program as we move forward. One of the largest changes to the program in Senate Bill 277 was the opportunity that our agricultural producers now have to generate what we have titled as saved water And they can do that through the division of water rights. And essentially what that looks like is an opportunity for them to split their water right into two pieces. So they can say, I'm going to use this part of my water right to irrigate crops. I can take this remainder of my water right that I have saved through increased irrigation efficiency, and that water is now made available to be leased to other users. It can be leased to stay in stream for Great Salt Lake users, or other people that may be interested. Maybe some fisheries or Trout Unlimited has expressed interest in keeping waters in the stream for those populations as well. So that's one of the biggest changes that we've seen. And I have had the opportunity to work with the state engineer on what saved water is. We've written a definition that will be proposed in the next legislative session, and the language behind it and all of that. So you can just see here about our purpose. One thing that didn't change with the legislation is that every project we fund through the water optimization program has to have a real-time meter installed. This is the first of its kind here in the state of Utah. While our water right users are metered, i.e. canal companies are our main water right users in the agricultural world, or water right holders, and we have never metered projects at the on-farm level. So when a canal company pulls their water right out of a reservoir, that water is metered, but it has never been metered, on a personal farm level. So we have that requirement. We'll be metering there and then documenting those savings as these projects are complete. Just to visit really quickly about some of the irrigation methods that we've implemented around the state. My favorite answer is it depends. We have a wide variety of irrigation systems around the state of Utah. And as such, we have implemented a wide variety of irrigation practices that are more efficient to help better use the irrigation water that we have. So up in northern Utah, I'm from Box Elder County, and we love our flood irrigation systems. We have some great new technologies that are looking at automating our flood systems and making those, in some instances, up to 95% efficient. Flood systems still occur and take place along the Weber River as well. And those have some huge impacts specific to the Great Salt Lake because of the return flows, the aquifer recharge that we get through our flood irrigation systems. So they're very valuable systems, and they've been important for us to make more efficient, which has been good. Once you get south of the Wasatch Front, central, southeastern, southern, and eastern Utah, we've implemented a lot of irrigation sprinkler systems. That is in part due to the fact that there's very little surface water, a lot of groundwater that is used there for irrigation. And so as we pump that water and pressurize it, we use sprinkler systems, as you can see here in the background. So a wide variety of projects that we've done. Another huge chunk of projects that we've been able to fund are with our canal companies. They've been great partners through the program to update their systems. Some of these canals were dug by the pioneers over 100 years ago. And they're just such valuable pieces of our irrigation history. And so to have the opportunity for our canal companies to take a part, be a part of this project and implement these systems and update their canals, we've been focusing on areas that may be high risk, that maybe have extreme water loss and things like that, and kind of working through those systems. So that's another big part of the project that we've been doing. I'll just ask really quick, do you want me to answer questions as I go, or should we wait until the end?
I think that it's probably better to wait at the end.
Okay.
But if somebody needs clarification of a point, I think that's ideal to kind of interrupt, because then it can be clarified in the moment, if that works for you.
Very good. Yeah, so interrupt if needed, if I can provide some clarification there. Just quickly to help spread the word, if any of you are working directly with irrigators in the areas that you serve, we are opening our next application period on Friday. So just wanted to provide a brief update on that. If there are neighbors or friends or any of you that are irrigators and are interested in looking at this program and being able to have a cost share benefit to implement these irrigation projects, we're going to open it up December 1st. It'll be open through January 31st, and this will be a $30 million award opportunity. The ranking will be completed by our new Agricultural Water Optimization Committee that was formed out of Senate Bill 277, and I'll share who that committee is And then we anticipate awarding grants starting in March. So we'll have a good turnaround time. We picked that time frame to give irrigators the opportunity to install projects if they're really gung-ho and ready to get going before our irrigation season starts in 2024. Some of the changes that we have had with the new application criteria, these have come directly from work that we have completed with the Water Optimization Committee. Canal companies and irrigation companies will now be ranked separately from on-farm projects. And then we raised the spending cap for irrigation companies from $500,000 up to $1 million. So each time an irrigation company applies to the program, they can ask for up to $1 million. Those numbers are a 50-50 cost share. So if you ask for $500,000, the total project cost would be $1 million. If you ask for $1 million, the total project cost would be $2 million or greater. We wanted to make this change for our irrigation companies because they are large scale projects with huge benefits to the state. And the $500,000 cap was just too small of an amount to make a benefit, or to make a big benefit to these companies. They have the opportunity to leverage other federal dollars. And sometimes those dollars oftentimes are in chunks of $1 million, $2 million, $3 million. So we wanted to be more on par with our federal partners as well. Another change that we had in the criteria is that our irrigation and canal companies are required to have a water loss study. And what this does is just evaluate the canal system to identify areas where there may be seepage losses or maybe high risk areas that could cause physical property damage or other things. And just an opportunity for our canal companies to have a plan on what they want to do, what work they want to do on their irrigation system before applying for money. And then the other largest part of the application criteria that's new, that came out of directly from Senate Bill 277, is that all our applicants are required to have a pre-consultation with the Division of Water Rights to discuss if they need a change application, if the applicant is interested in saved water, and that's splitting the water right, like I talked about. It's not required to split a water right, but if an applicant is interested, this consultation is required to be able to talk through their project with Division of Water Rights so that the producer has a clear picture of any potential water that they could save and ways that it could be used if it's something that they're interested in. And lastly, really quick, just a couple other criteria. We removed, last year in our application, we had a cap that if your project costs over $7,000 an acre, wasn't eligible for funding. We removed that stipulation, and the committee will evaluate those projects. We realized with that stipulation, we were negatively impacting our small and urban producers that may have still very valuable irrigation projects that are costly or cost more than $7,000 an acre because their acreages are small. And so we just want the committee to be able to look at those projects. And then, like I mentioned before, on-farm applicants will be limited to requesting up to $500,000 a year, and that can be in multiple applications if needed. So that's just kind of some of the nuts and bolts of the program, how we're operating, how we're moving forward with the new legislation that we received in the last legislative session. Like I mentioned, Senate Bill 277 appointed a new water optimization committee. This committee is appointed directly from the director of DNR, Joel Ferry, put this committee together. And so you can see the individuals that serve here, Commissioner Craig Butters, Teresa Wilhelmsen, who serves as our state engineer and is also the director of Division of Water Rights. Candace Hassenjaeger is the director of Division of Water Resources. Dr. Ken White is the dean of the College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences. William Merkley serves as our Water Conservancy District representative. He is also out in the Uinta Basin. And so we love that representation that he brings for the Colorado River. Jason Morgan represents our conservation districts, and Jeff Hardy is our vice chairman representing Northern Utah Agriculture. Brett Bunker is our chairman representing Central Utah Agriculture, and Brandon Yardley represents our Southern Utah Agriculture. And I also just like to point out Jason Morgan, Jeff Hardy, Brett Bunker, and Brandon Yardley all make a living solely from agriculture. So we appreciate very much their input in this committee and their willingness to serve on this committee to drive the program, and that is a benefit to our ag producers as well as the state of Utah. So just to talk about some of the work that we've done and where's the water? That's the question that we always get. And so I like to visit about this. So in total, since the program started, we received funding initially out of the 2020 legislative session with an initial $3 million. And then we've been awarded funding in almost every legislative session since, except for right in the middle of COVID. We weren't awarded funding, but in total, we've funded 333 projects since our program has started. Annual reporting is required for all of our projects, and that's reporting of the actual water use from their real-time meter is required after a project is completed and has used the project or has been in implementation for an entire irrigation season. I don't know if any of you saw the recent water audit that came out where the auditors talked about how the program specifically wasn't following our own rules by requiring annual reporting. So we just wanted to provide some context that those reports are only required after projects are completed and have irrigated for a full year. And so of the 333 total projects, there are only 24 that are complete fully and have completed a full year of irrigation under there. So we just really, as we talk about where's the water and what are we doing, we are just barely getting started. Oftentimes these projects take 2 or 3 years to implement. By the time we fund, typically, we'll fund, and like you could see in the timeline that I shared at the beginning, if we fund a project in March, a producer may not be able to implement that because the irrigation season will start. They might wait till the end of the irrigation season, like this time of the next year, to be able to install their project, then use it for an irrigation season. So 2 to 3 years is an earmark that we like to use for these projects to be fully implemented. So we are really just at the very beginning stages of what we're doing with our projects and the very beginning stages of reporting the water that our producers are using there. We have been able to contract $65 million. And of that, only 17 million has actually been paid out to producers. And that reflects those 24 projects, or the 65 projects that are complete and the 24 that have been using those projects for a full irrigation season. So I'd like to take the opportunity to share those numbers because there is a sense of urgency around the Great Salt Lake and the things that we can do. And our producers are coming to the table and stepping up to be a part of the solution. I'd like to point out that the funding for these projects, the 200 million that was awarded to the program, is intended to cover half the cost of the projects, and the other half of those projects are paid for out of the pocket of our producers. Some have the opportunity to leverage federal funding, which reduces that out-of-pocket cost, but the majority of these projects are paid for by the producer, the other half. So I think that's just such a winning effort by our agricultural producers to not only come to the table to help increase irrigation efficiency, but also foot the other half of the bill themselves. And so I think that's just a beautiful story to share with our producers about our producers there. Then I always like to take an opportunity whenever I get the chance to talk about alfalfa. Alfalfa is in the news constantly. We've heard it being called the green plague, all sorts of, that it's super water hungry and all of these things. And it's disheartening to us in the agricultural industry because a lot of those claims are just simply false. And I wanted to share with you all the true information regarding alfalfa. This slide was put together by myself, the Utah Farm Bureau, and Utah State University. And we kind of just brainstormed about all of the wonderful benefits that alfalfa brings to the agricultural community and to the state of Utah. And so we just put together this list here to say that alfalfa is a desert plant. It is drought tolerant and very resilient. In some instances, we can go more than 2 years without irrigating alfalfa. And when it does receive irrigation water again, it will come back and produce another high yielding crop. It is a perennial crop, so it saves on costs and our carbon footprint. It's not a crop that we have to plant every single year. We don't have to be burning diesel fuel and doing any type of soil work. We can plant alfalfa and it'll stay as a crop for 5 to 7 years. It's a very water efficient crop typically we water alfalfa once per cutting, and on average in the state of Utah, we're able to harvest 4 crops of alfalfa every year. So usually alfalfa is getting watered about once a month. We take a crop once a month as well. Alfalfa is very high in calories, high in protein, and high in fiber. So it's a wonderful feed substance for our animal agriculture. Alfalfa is perfectly suited to Utah's climate. The dry climate aids in harvesting. I get asked, I've been asked a lot why we don't just grow alfalfa somewhere else, like in the Midwest or somewhere that has more water. And you simply cannot. You need big periods of drying time. Alfalfa is cut and then lays on the field in windrows to dry, and we need the climate that Utah has to be able to harvest alfalfa. It does really well with heat and sunlight, and it does really well in salty soils, which isn't news to anybody, but we have very salty soils in the state of Utah. We are in the Great Salt Lake Basin, so alfalfa is very suited to salty soils. Like I talked about, we can have multiple harvests per year. One amazing benefit about alfalfa is that it fixes nitrogen. So it reduces our dependence on commercial fertilizer application. It can take nitrogen out of the air, and it has nodules that it forms on the roots, and then it fixes nitrogen into the soil to be used by other crops. Alfalfa has a wonderful root structure that helps control wind and water erosion. We have wonderfully established markets here locally, and we have an international markets. Something we get asked a lot is, or the media sometimes shares, is all we're doing is selling our alfalfa to China or Israel or overseas. Utah State put some numbers together that said that it's about 18% of our total alfalfa production goes overseas. About 50% of the production stays here in the state of Utah. And then the other portion of that production is sold in the United States, specifically California and Texas. We sell a lot of alfalfa too. Alfalfa is natural pests and has less natural pests. It has autotoxicity, so it essentially sends a toxicity into the soil to help suppress weeds, so we can have a reduction in herbicide use. And Utah State estimates that it's about an $800 million input into Utah's economy every year. It's such a valuable crop for our economy, and so I like to just take that opportunity to share that alfalfa is not the green plague. And when we talk about, we get asked why aren't our producers growing other crops? Well, if we can find another crop that checks all these boxes, our producers would look at growing it. But alfalfa, it is the crop. It is the reason that we grow it, for all of these wonderful benefits that it has, and is not such a water hungry crop as we get told often in the media. So I'd like to take the opportunity to share that as well. And then kind of wrapping up here with just a few things. I love this table from the Division of Water Resources on Utah's water budget. And so what this table shows, on the very top, you'll see in acre feet, on average, our annual precipitation that the state of Utah gets every year is 61 million acre feet. Of that 61 million acre feet, 4.7 million acre feet is diverted each year for all use. That includes homes, businesses, industry, and agriculture. So of the total amount of precipitation that the state of Utah gets, 7.74% of that is diverted for all human use, if you will, taken out of the natural streams for all the things that we need water for. So that leaves about 56 million acre feet in nature, in our natural streams that we have around the state. And then if you look at the second half of the table, of that 7.7% that's diverted, this is where we see the number that we hear, 70 to 80% of water is used for agriculture. So that 79% of the diverted water is used for agriculture. So that equates to about 3.7 million acre feet of water that's used for agriculture. And then you can see the other numbers there for landscape, irrigation, and industry and community, excluding landscape, to see the breakout there. But I love this information from the Division of Water Resources to put into context, to show that, the majority of the water that our state receives in precipitation stays in the natural streams. And yes, the water that we divert in large is used by agriculture. But I like to just show this to show as well that agriculture isn't the silver bullet. that's going to save the lake. We are definitely part of the solution, and we want to be part of the solution in agriculture. But it doesn't fall totally on our shoulders. You know, they're just the weather and the climate, those obviously have a big impact. And so we just, here in agriculture, we're ready to do our part. We're ready to implement these projects and are excited for the opportunities that we have to implement irrigation projects that will more efficiently use the water and give us an opportunity to share that water elsewhere and in the needed places that we have around the state.
Hannah, one point of clarification on this chart, because having read the water study, it kind of confused me as well. Of the large amount that remains in nature, can you kind of define what that means? Because I think a part of that is evaporation, part, which, remains in nature, but
yes.
Can you give some context around that number? Because I think everyone has a different definition of what remains in nature might mean, particularly as it relates to Great Salt Lake.
Yeah.
It's not like it's staying in the lake.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that question. And so again, I'll point out this is statewide. This is not just specific to the Great Salt Lake Basin. So a large percentage of this numbers can be in places that will have no effect on Great Salt Lake. So Great Salt Lake, I think, and don't quote me on these numbers, I'd have to look, but I think it evaporates 2 million acre feet every year, just evaporates off of the lake. Obviously there's some evaporation that happens in our reservoirs. So when we say remaining in nature, it does go into the reservoirs and then stays into our streams and in the rivers. That does include evaporation, like you said. So yes, it shouldn't be considered or shouldn't be assumed that 56 million acre feet goes directly to the Great Salt Lake. I don't know what that percentage is, but it's just not being diverted for human use. So of all the other things that happens to the water, yep, evaporation is part of it, stream flow is part of it, reservoir storage is part of it, all of those other components.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that because I think it's such a big number.
Yes, yep, absolutely. And a statewide number that we should be sure and look at as well. All right, and with that, I am happy to answer any questions. Just provide my contact info, but if there's any questions or discussions you'd like to have, I'd love to take a shot at those.
Linda put a question in the chat, but maybe Linda, you want to just ask it out loud. Unmute.
There. Am I being heard?
Yep.
Okay. I live in an area that's primarily agricultural, and I see alfalfa being watered constantly. You suggested, Hannah, that one watering per cutting should do it. And it seems like those around me haven't heard that information. So what would you say to farmers who are really putting a lot of water on alfalfa?
Yeah, and probably what you're seeing, are they irrigating with sprinklers, like a wheel line?
Yes, they are.
Yep.
They are.
So what you're seeing there is a set, is what we call it. So there's a riser that comes out of the ground. That water is pressurized, and they will run a set. Those are set about 60 feet apart typically, and that set will run anywhere from 12 to 24 hours, and then it's moved to the next set in the field. So you're right,
Yes.
You're seeing those sprinklers run constantly, but that one specific spot in the field will get that water usually once per cutting, then it moves to the next set, moves to the next set, and then eventually they'll roll the wheel line to the end of the field and come in and harvest and start over. So it's the context of what how the irrigation is being used is they're irrigating that in 12 to 24 hour sets, and that's typically all the water that section of alfalfa in the field will get for that crop.
Okay, so will your metering be able to give us a better picture of how much this is being done?
How much water?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. That's exactly what it'll do. So just as the flow meter will say exactly how much water is going directly on farm.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Norma, you have a question.
Yeah, this is kind of maybe
philosophical question. I don't know. So a lot of these water rights that agricultural producers have, I mean, they go back, 150 years. And my understanding is that the Utah's water belongs to the public. People have rights to use it, but the water actually belongs to the public. So my question is, as agricultural practices have changed over that long period of time, is it really fair for that water right to be set in stone? I mean, if you can produce the same amount of product using less water, it seems to me that the rest of the water should revert to the public rather than to public use, rather than going to, say, enrich a farmer for selling those rights or leasing those rights or whatever. I mean, it's like I say, it's a big question, but I just wondered what your thoughts are along those lines.
Yeah, that is a big question, maybe a philosophical question that would have to take into account, the validity of water rights in the West. I don't think maybe just a state of Utah problem or issue, but a Western water rights issue. The way that our state works now, as you know, is first in time, first in right. And those water rights have been recognized as such. And so I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. That's a heavy question. Obviously, our agricultural producers live and die by that water. That's the sole source of their business. And so obviously they're very protecting of those water rights. And so maybe this program gives us the opportunity through our metering to see what that looks like, how much water we're actually using, what's being metered, and then maybe at the discretion of the state engineer to say, should there be some curtailments? The hard thing with that is if it's going to be fair and there are curtailments on water rights, it would curtail municipal water rights as well. Some people, some counties, some areas in the state wouldn't have a drink. And so that's a hard question to get to, because agricultural water rights are older than some of those. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, that's not a really great answer. That's a very philosophical question that I think is going to come to light sooner than later. I honestly do. I think that we will be having those discussions. Our legislators will be having those discussions sooner than later about agricultural water rights and who gets the water. What's the biggest priority?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that we need to start thinking seriously about, because we continue to grow, and there's probably not going to be a whole lot more water coming in to the system.
Yes. Yep.
Thank
you. Yep. Joan also has a question, and Joan, remember to unmute yourself.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for coming today. This group just gets the greatest speakers every month. So I have like a two-part question, and one of them may be way above what your pay grade is. But so the first question is, it relates to an article that I read that had to do with a certain politically connected rancher. I think he was getting new water out of an aquifer. He may have had the rights. He may have the rights, but he hasn't previously pumped wells into this aquifer north of the Great Salt Lake. And and it was juxtaposing that with the fact that this proposed lithium extraction company, Compass Mining had to hold off on a proposal to extract lithium from the lake, which is a resource that we desperately need in our transition to clean energy. So my question is first of all, when you pump a new well in, are they just required to put in state-of-the-art metering and use of optimization of the water, so that we're not coming back 2 years from now and giving them $500,000 to optimize their water use?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is no requirement for that, and it would depend on
That's horrible.
the type of well. So it could be a well for municipal use for home or for livestock irrigation, livestock watering, or for irrigation. So it would depend on the type of well that they're applying for. If it's specifically for irrigation, usually those are larger volumes than for a home or for livestock watering.
Okay,
So,
it might have been livestock watering. I don't recall. I read this a couple of weeks ago. Then so then that leads to the bigger question of how do we balance people extracting new water from an aquifer that the lake depends on these aquifers. You know, the aquifers recharge the streams, and if they're depleted, the streams actually end up recharging the aquifer and not the lake. So how do you balance something like that against a company that's basically going to take water out and mostly put it back and provide something that we desperately need in our economy in a way that probably has much less environmental impact than the other lithium extraction mines that have been proposed around the state in Nevada?
yeah, that's a wonderful question that I think is the question. Is it's going to be the balance of agriculture, of growth, you know, in the state of Utah, and do we want our children to be able to come here and build and live and be able to find that balance? I think that there's absolute value in being able to have the capacity to feed ourselves as a state. I think there's absolute value in that, and that shouldn't be disregarded. It's a question that I pose quite often, is what if California can't feed us? They are going through huge droughts as well. You know, some of those staggering statistics about 95% of the strawberries, 90% of the lettuce, like just these huge amounts of percentages come directly from California. And what if California can't feed us? I think there's value in having the capacity to feed ourselves. And so we have to find that balance of where do we draw the line. You know, limiting growth has never been a part of the conversation. That's a really hard conversation to have. On our end, limiting agriculture is also a hard conversation to have as well, that we're going to have to strike a balance to find.
Right. Well, if the Great Salt Lake dries up, that'll pretty much limit growth on its own. So
yeah, we all lose. Really, we all lose
Yeah.
if the Great Salt Lake dries up, and we're very aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hannah, I have a question. So, and I know it's early on, only 24 of the projects have had completion plus a year. But it's a big chunk of money. It's taxpayer money.
Yes.
How is ROI going to be measured? You know, what's the successful, I get that we're metering, but that just tells us how much water. It doesn't tell us whether we're using less, whether we're becoming more efficient. So how do we how do we grade these projects, right? That $30 million or a total of, what did you say, some $60 million to date has been spent?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and one that's really been a moving target for the program. So, in the beginning, it was just kind of irrigation efficiency. That's what we were looking at, and we could present a number and say these projects are 35% more efficient on average. And it really comes down to two aspects that we talk about, is diverted water and depleted water. So diverted water is what's coming out of the system, what we're taking out of the river, taking out of the reservoir. Depleted water is the water that our crops are using. And so there's been huge discussion about which do we measure. The only thing that we can accurately measure is our diverted water. Our state engineer has an interest in attempting to measure the water that our crops are actually using. And between those two, the goal is to say it's this number of acre feet of water that is now available for other uses. That's our goal. To say agriculture water use has been reduced by this number of acre feet of water. The other half of that equation is then what, right? Where does the water go? What is the expectation? As it sits right now, there is no mandate that that water has to go to the Great Salt Lake. There's no legislation that says if you participate in this project, you have to send your saved water to the Great Salt Lake.
Well,
And
that's
so,
that's really Norma's question, right?
yeah.
In a
So
way,
maybe that's some work that we do. Maybe that's work that the legislation, you know, if it's of interest to this group, that the legislation should hear about. I think that it's going to be brought to light in this legislative session immediately. That there should be some type of stipulation that that water has to go to the lake. And then the other half of it is how do we ensure, if we say in agriculture, we are metering, we know that we have used only this much water. How do we ensure that the rest of it gets to the lake and doesn't evaporate or is diverted by somebody else or goes into a pond or stays in a reservoir? It's just a very, very complex question that has been a moving target that we need to do a good job at, because it's an enormous investment for our taxpayers. And we understand the expectation of is water in the lake.
Mhm. Thank you. That's that. I think that's really the next step and very helpful in the process, because it kind of wraps all of these questions together. We probably have time for one more question if there's a burning question out there. And I don't see a hand up.
My hand's up.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Chris.
Literally, my hand is up. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, I didn't see you, so I didn't see your hand. So
That's okay. Thanks.
ask
Melinda.
away.
Actually, a two-parter or so, going back to alfalfa. First, I have to say that, you know, this is just observational, anecdotal, but I mirror Linda's comment about seeing irrigation done on a daily basis, and they may be moving sprinklers around, but I'm almost positive that those sprinklers get set and reset multiple times. And so that you know, a single parcel of land gets watered over and over again. Maybe it's a function of, you know, the weather at the time, and it's extremely dry in the summer, and we're up here at 7,000 feet, you know, that there's just more water required to grow a unit of alfalfa in Summit County versus maybe other parts of the state. But I was really surprised that you said that it only needs one watering per cutting. That's a really fascinating piece of information. If you want to comment on that before I go on.
Yeah, I would love to. And it should be taken in the context of the volume of water, right? So up here where I live in Box Elder County, we flood irrigate. And so I am delivering 3-ish inches of water in my one irrigation. That sprinkler system is probably delivering 1 inch of water in its irrigation system. So it varies depending on the system, which is exactly why you see those sprinklers running so often. You know, typically that alfalfa will need about 3 to 4 inches per cutting. So it's how that water is being delivered.
So a flooding mechanism is much more efficient in delivering water to the soil than spray irrigation, which is at risk of evaporation, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
And so that's a huge part of the projects that we're doing is we have nozzle packages that can go on those sprinklers that it vastly increase the droplet size. So we're greatly reducing evaporation. Big droplets are just hitting the ground.
Right.
So we're trying to help with that. And a lot of those producers don't have the option to flood irrigate if their canal system is pressurized.
Right.
So it's the only option they have to use sprinklers. So if we can be more efficient with those sprinklers, that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Okay. So my other question, if you'll allow me, is again with respect to alfalfa. The other surprised me is that you say alfalfa is drought tolerant and it does well in salty soils. Is that one of the reasons why we just can't stop growing alfalfa and start growing more vegetables and fruits? I mean, that's always the question, right? It's like, why you grow alfalfa? Why don't you grow more peaches and more apples and more lettuce? And can you talk a little bit more about the soil chemistry and perhaps why that's not, this type of soil or this type of climate is not available to other crops?
Yeah. Thank you. That's such a wonderful question. So
I
I have
know.
looked, I have, I've looked at hundreds of soil tests over my career. Prior to running this program, I did a nutrient management program that was exactly that. We would analyze soil tests and say, what's the best value on this specific soil? And I have never seen a soil pH lower than 7.8 here in the state of Utah, where 6 is in the middle. So everything is acidic. Every soil test I've ever seen. And typically they're in the 8 range, 8.2, 7.9 to 8.2. So very salty soils to begin with, that require even excess water to be able to flush those salt profiles down and move them in the system. So one thing to be aware of is we have some very unique and prime farm ground that is now houses. All of our peach orchards are houses, our cherry orchards are houses, our apple orchards, the soils that were suited to grow those vegetable crops, we have paved over. Davis County has such unique, beautiful soils for vegetable production, and we have paved over those soils. In Weber County and all of those. So those very unique opportunities that we had, if you look at, I don't know if anyone is familiar with Web Soil Survey. It's such a really, really cool tool that we have that the federal government has mapped all the soils in the nation. And so you see those prime and unique farmland is the Wasatch Front. So what we're left with, we still have some good farmland here, but by and large, what we're left with is marginal farm ground. And yes, that's a huge, if you think of it in southern Utah, as we get into Red Rocks in that area, super high salt content. And so vegetable production would be very, very poor in those type of soils.
Unless the soil was somehow amended with something that was less alkaline in nature or more organic.
Yeah, and we have a program with the Department of Ag, a soil health program, that we're looking at exactly that, is how can we build our soils through cover crops and animal impact and compost and manure and give back to the soil and try to build it so that it is more valuable for other types of crop production.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Could I ask one more question? For all the farmers that aren't involved in your program, is there any guidance provided to them on how to save water? I mean, getting back to what Linda said at the beginning, you drive around in the summer, 85 degrees, middle of the day, spray irrigation everywhere, and it's very disheartening. And I'm wondering, do these farmers have any options? Are they provided with any guidance or education on what they can just do, not being compensated, but what can you just do to improve water efficiency?
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea. We try to host outreach events around the state, very specifically through our soil health program, host many outreach programs around the state that we call them a conservation fair. And we just try to connect producers with resources that are available and technical resources also that are available to them if they're just interested in something different. One other piece of that puzzle that I failed to mention may just be their irrigation turn. They might only be able to have their irrigation water from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. the next day, and then they don't get it. So irrigation turns are a part of the question that we talk about a lot is, can we have more on-demand irrigation, or are they set turns and no matter what, if you want your water this week, you have to take it now? And so, that's another part of the conversation we have with canal companies is more on-demand watering versus turns watering and how to balance those systems so that water is available.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. We're at time to turn it over to Chris, but I think this has been incredibly helpful, particularly just some the insights that you shared on the program, and then I think the discussion afterwards has been tremendously robust. And I'll just remind everyone that I put in the chat the link to the League of Women Voters Utah Water Study, which is done in a different way, obviously, but it's on water usage and it's 53 pages, but the executive summary is only about 3. And then the webinar that we had on Great Salt Lake. So if people want to dig a little deeper after this and they weren't able to look at those earlier, I encourage you. And so then we're going to turn it over to you, Chris, to give us kind of that quick update on, it's flu season, it's virus season, we're all going
Right.
indoors, it's cold. So tell us
Right.
what's going on.
Okay. Let me touch base first with respect to drought, give the quick drought update, because since last month, not much has changed. The state remains in pretty good shape with respect to any formal definition of drought. Only about 10% of the state right now has a formal designation, as in a mild drought, let's call it. That's mostly on the east side of the state. And it hasn't changed much. If anything, it may have even dropped a percentage or two since the last month of my last report. So we're in pretty good shape with respect to so far, right? With respect to precipitation across the state, precipitation rates, snowfall, etc. So good news there, particularly compared to this time last year. Maybe Hannah, you can supplement this, that we were nearly the entire state was in some form of drought designation, D1 up to D4. So dramatically different compared to last year at this time. So that's the drought condition. Now put on my Department of Health hat. Yeah, the Department of Health now has a updated web page that tracks flu cases, COVID cases, and RSV cases. And you can find that by going to summitcountyhealth.org. And on the left side of the page, of that front page, you'll see something called Data Dashboard. Click on that, and you will get all the graphs associated with those three specific types of illnesses over the last 2 or 3 years or so. COVID's been being tracked for the last 3 years. Flu seasons, regular annual seasonal flu also being tracked. RSV is new, right? So that's got more recent data. Basically, with respect to all three, we're in also fairly good shape there. But of course, the reporting now is much more varied. And with respect to COVID, this is based on laboratory data. So if you get sick, you go to your doctor and they take a test, that will get sent to the laboratory. And if you test positive, that information gets reported on the database back to Summit County. If you get sick and you do a home-based test that we all have now, and you test positive based on that, that's not going to get reported. I was told that even if I picked up the phone and called Dr. Bondran at the health department, told him I tested positive, he said, that's not part of the reporting process anymore. So the data with respect to COVID cases is somewhat squishier or lower, conservatively low. What you can track is wastewater data, which that website does track. And we're seeing a little uptick in virus showing up in wastewater in the Colville area these past couple weeks. So with respect to flu season, also fairly light so far, unless again, anecdotally, who here knows somebody that's tested positive for COVID in the last couple of weeks? Even they did get the vaccine too, and the booster. So you still got to be aware of that. And we're less than a week away from removed from Thanksgiving. So we're going to see cases pop up with respect to COVID and RSV, the new kid on the block. So that's it. I got a minute or so if there's any questions or clarifications on what I just said. Otherwise, I'm good.
One question, and I don't know if Chris, you'd have any information on this. Most of us were encouraged to get the flu shot and the COVID shot at the same time. And now they're talking about if you're older, which some of us are, and you get the flu shot and the COVID shot at the same time, there's an increased risk of stroke. Any comment on that?
No, use your term, above my pay grade. I'll have to
Let's
bring
go.
that up with the epidemiologist at this coming Monday's Board of Health meeting and find out about that, the potential relationship. I know I got my COVID and my RSV shot. No, was it flu and RSV? I think I got flu and RSV at the same time, and then my COVID shot separately. And I had about a quick fever with my COVID booster. You know, a few hours and 24 hours later, I was not feeling well. Then I recovered. But I will check in on that, Martha, about the relationship between stroke and combining some of those.
Right. I mean, I got my flu and COVID at the same time. I had no issue.
No issue.
I haven't reacted to anything, and I did RSV a while ago. So.
Good. Good.
So Chris, do you, I've heard competing opinions. Do you need a prescription for the RSV shot or is it an age limit, or how does that work?
My answer to that is no, you don't need a prescription. I went into the pharmacy. Well, I want to get my flu shot, and they said, "Do you want your RSV shot too?" Okay. So no, RSV is available to all. Well, don't quote me on this. I'm pretty sure the suggested age groups, and at any time. So, and my health insurance covered it.
Yeah, that was my experience as well.
Okay.
I just walked in.
Yeah. So, okay. Thanks, Martha.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Well, I think we're going to end right on time. Just a reminder that that on December 5th, there is the webinar with Ben Sheehan on his OMG WTF. What does the Constitution actually say? Which should be really interesting. That's at 6:30, and the link I put in the chat. And then on the next day, on the 6th, is the Deck the Hall social, and we're going to help Linda out by RSVPing so she knows how many tables to decorate. And, you know, certainly the webinar is open to the public. I think you have to be a member of the league to join the social, but that's just an excuse to join the league. So there you go. All right. Well, thank you again, Hannah. Anything, Jill? I know we're trying to save your voice, so I don't want to make you say anything. You know, nothing more to add. All right. Well, then you recover. I'm coming. I'll be back in Park City on the 12th, and so maybe we'll set up a walk, and your voice will be recovered by then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Zoom down.
Thank you.